Hello, I'm here with Dr. Mohammad Tavakoli in his beautiful office at University of Toronto, and I'm visiting his very valuable archive in his office elsewhere as well, and we're going to learn a little bit about it. Stay with us.
I have over 100,000 volumes of journals, newspaper, books, printed books, and lithograph chopsangi. And I have collected these since during my graduate school years in Chicago. I started compiling flyers, leaflets, and pamphlets from various political organizations and Confederation of Iranian Students. And I have many of those things that have not been necessarily collected. So I started as an activist interested in the history of the Iranian student movement. And then with my work at the University of Chicago Library, I became interested in sort of finding stuff that were not available in other places. And in 1992, the origin of really the solid foundation of much of my collection goes to 1993, when I traveled to India on a fellowship and American Institute of Indian Studies, and working on the origin of Iranian modernity, Indian origin of Iranian modernity. I already knew that there were several publishers, printers in India predating Iranian printing. And I managed to find their addresses and got access to their storages. And I was involved, for example, in one of them, Munshi Novel Kishore Press, that was in Lucknow. And Lucknow was the really print capital of Persian in the middle of the 19th century. I managed to develop a full inventory of the publisher's storage, and then I bought 1 or 2 copies of each book that they had. And so that became the very foundation of my collection. And then later on, I started purchasing books in Iran, particularly when I had to go back to Iran because of my parents being ill. And this is in 1997, 98. I started going to Iran rather once a year. And most of the time, at nights, I spent it with my family. During the days, I went from one bookstore to another, and I discovered that a lot of bookstores they have the front shop and they have pass through, that they have a lot of books that are not out there for general readers to see. And I managed to compile a great deal of books that were in the pass through of various publishers, in the back storage of publishers. And increasingly, it has become this unique collection of the predominantly 19th, 20th century books, journals, magazines, newspapers, that is unique in its composition. Because it includes newspapers, journals, and in the middle of journals, you find highly personal letters, notes. In the beginning of lithographs, you have sort of basic bios and dates of the original owner, and in between of them, like Kitab, you find a lot of archival material. And then I have also begun to collect archival material that were available in the market, and I purchased them. And they eventually, originally, the books that I purchased in Iran came to United States, to Bloomington, Illinois, where I used to live. And then we had two large trailers of books sort of coming to Canada when we moved to Toronto. And then ever since, I also have had large collections that I had purchased in Iran that have come to Canada, and I'm sort of in the process of compiling them all in one place. For a lack of better term right now, I call it Tavakoli Archive. It's an archive and library, but the archival materials are really important, and is open to my students, colleagues who know about the collection and want to come and do research on material, on printed material or archival material that is not available anywhere else.
That's wonderful. What are some of the examples of some of the books you have?
Let me see if I can pull this out. Whoa. This is a dictionary of Persian, Montahiyul Arab. And if I find, this was very early 19th century publication, and it belonged to the Fort William College in Calcutta. And let me see if I can find a volume with the first page. Here is Kitab College Fort William. And then it went to Madrasa Ahmadiyya, and now in the Tavakoli archive. And this is one of the earliest examples of Persian typesetting that started prior to Persian lithographs. Lithographs come later than typesetting. And let me see if I can find a few other samples here. This is another Karname Haydari from 1847, 1263, and was published in Mission Press in Calcutta. And as you see, this is sort of typesetting, but the letters are like handwriting. And let me see if I can get the first page. And here you have the
Who is that?
This is Sir Matt Dock, who sort of was involved in publishing this book. And this is the cover page. And the first page. And as you see, there are two different fonts here, three different fonts used here. So one of the really areas that has not been studied intensely in Persian is various Persian fonts that emerged with typesetting. You know. And this is a Tafsir Quran of Sheikh Abu Fatih with publishing Muzaffar Shah's reign. And as you see, the early printing has a lot of illustrations in the around the pages like manuscripts, and increasingly they wither away and becomes really simple text. Tafsir Razi. So I have about 4 different editions of Hezar Yek Shab, and each scene has an illustration. And some of these illustrations are really important because of their artistic value. How a story of one night is rendered into a narrative image, narrative sort of drawing. And from that point of view, it's really important to look at each scene and how it corresponds with the story, and how from one edition to another, the drawing changes. And that could itself be a great work of art history. So in these books, there are layers and layers of research that can sort of lead Iranian studies into a new direction that doesn't have to imitate other fields, but innovate and be creative in its own domain. Some of the earliest examples of Persian printing was done in India, and this is one of the earliest example of, again, typesetting, and this is from 1808. As you see, the book is in a bad condition. It has been in a basement somewhere, and pages have been damaged, but because of the high quality of the paper, is rather intact. And again, what is important here is, as a typesetted text, is sort of a study of fonts. The content of the text is very important, but what is also important is various Persian fonts, history of Persian fonts. And these were books that were published by the British in India. So when I went to India, I was working on the Indian origins of Iranian modernity, understanding that much of the early Persian printing, rather than starting in Tehran or Tabriz, started in India. And a large number of, nowadays, Iranians always come to Europe, to United States. In the 18th and 19th century, 17th, 18th, 19th century, Iranian intellectuals used to often go to India. And since Persian was the lingua franca of India, they found employments in various places, particularly if they knew how to write, read, and edit. They often had high-level positions in India. And thus this connection between Iranian intellectuals and India has continued for several centuries before the Iranian modernity of the late 18th and 19th century.
Can you talk a little bit about the notes that are on some of your books?
Yeah, let me see if I can. Okay, let me get my. This is a book called Hayat al-Haywan, and each haywan, animal that is introduced, and there is a photo of the animal on the margins. Yeah. This is in Arabic, but there is also, I have a Persian edition of the same thing. And in some instances are pictures and drawings that are really unique. In one case, I had one of my, for example, look at these images here.
What is that? This.
Beings, humans, and these are all the hasharats that you see. see if I can find the Persian edition of this. It would be good to look through it. This is sorry, it's not Hayatul Haywan, but it is another text with a lot of marginal notes.
And who made these marginal notes?
These are usually texts. These are sort of classical texts, and the marginal notes are often what the marginal notes are equivalent of our contemporary scholarly footnotes. So marginal notes are commentaries on the text, and you see this is one. There are then in this case you have varieties of marginalia. Again, these were printed on lithographs, and preparing each plate itself is a very highly time-consuming and technically very complex. I haven't found my... show you this. This is a copy of Iskandarname. The first pages were missing, and I managed to find copies of it and add it to the beginning. And these are sort of Iskandarname, like Shahnameh and a lot of other Persian classics, are highly illustrated. So each story goes with a illustration. So, and sometimes they are hand painted. You will find the name of the artist, signed sort of drawing and visualization of a scene. And again, all of these have been studied, but very sort of in a very early and simplistic kind of studies. Again, these are many of the books that you see if it was owned by someone, and the black and white illustrations are turned into color. The individual who owned it or someone in the family decided to paint them. And so you have this unique, this makes the book itself very, very unique. Here's a sort of, it's a woman. And there's the ring. And well, so while this is a lithograph, it has the quality of a manuscript because the painting of the illustrations make it absolutely unique. So there is no other copy of this particular edition or here.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So what do you envision for this collection?
Well, I'm hoping to find a permanent institutional home for them. That is, this is sort of a product of over 40 years of collecting, and collecting as a collector that I being a librarian, being a historian, I have always looked for collecting unique stuff. So from that point of view, it's a collection that is unlike a lot of other collections. For example, being familiar with the entire library collection of University of Toronto, Princeton, Harvard, Columbia, and as a inquiring historian, I looked for the missing volumes or missing journals, missing books that they didn't have in their library, in their collection, and I have collected those. So from that point of view, a lot of things that are in my personal collection are unique. There are duplicates, there are things that any other library has, but it also has a lot of stuff that you may not be able to find in many other libraries, and some of these like lithographs. And one of the really most important component of my collection is the lithograph collection. I have over 10,000 volumes of lithographs published in Iran, in India, in Iraq, and some in Central Asia that I have compiled over time. And as you saw in the case of Iskandarnameh, because of the illustrations, because of marginalia and the kind of notes that the owner has left, these are really unique collections like manuscripts. So finding a permanent home, probably at the University of Toronto or any other research library that will make the collection available to researchers, high-level researchers in Iranian studies.